Calling from an 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Josh from Chicago.
Hello, Josh from Chicago.
I'm not calling in to defend deep dish pizza today. Don't worry.
All right. I'm glad to hear
I'll do that
that.
another time. It speaks for itself.
Couldn't
I
help
wanted to
myself.
actually add in about the Kamala Harris and also these sort of centrist candidates and what I've noticed about them and how they have sort of adopted these sort of progressive things.
Right.
And where I think Bernie's lane is. I've noticed that a lot of times they will the way to tell for lack of better words a wolf in sheep's clothing. I've felt like, and this was especially true with Gillibrand, who I think is she's basically kind of just a hack. I think right now they will not offer any kinds of specifics,
Right.
and will speak in generalities, and then in the case of Gillibrand, she'll blow that question on Pod Save America, which was basically kind of just a layup question. And I think where Bernie and Warren will rise above is that they do actually speak in specifics. And I think it was Michael who talked about this the other day, where he said that Warren and Bernie can almost aid each other in a primary by almost being sort of a tag team for progressives and building on each other's ideas. And even though she's a bit more wonkish, I've been incredibly impressed with the campaign she's run so far. She's apparently done a good job in Iowa. And I think it's very possible that Kamala Harris, and I don't remember exactly how Marco Rubio was perceived by Republicans.
Right.
It's also very possible that she goes the way of Marco Rubio, where people see through her and she just goes nowhere.
It's possible. I mean, it's possible. Here's the thing.
Especially in a primary as big as Democratic primary is going to be.
Yes, it's possible. Yes, but I will say this. The thing that really did Marco Rubio in was his work in the Senate. People, like he went out on a limb for immigration reform, and then he stepped back and basically dropped it. Literally dropped it in front of everybody. And I just don't think there is going to be an opportunity for Harris to make that kind of mistake. In the next 2 years, I just don't think there's going to be. But you may be right. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, it's too early. It's too early to make these assessments. It's just, she comes out, she's got 20,000 people at her announcement rally. Her sort of coming out went off fairly flawlessly. But we'll talk about it right now. I appreciate the call, Josh. Here is Kamala Harris in a CNN town hall, which follows her big rally. 20,000 people. It's a lot of people, folks, on the day you announce. Just logistically, that suggests that she has a very strong campaign apparatus. Now, granted, it was in California but I will remind you, California is in the third tranche. I think it's the third or fourth, basically, week of primaries. Super Tuesday, very early. And that's going to make a big, big difference. It's tough. It's tough. Here she is with Jake Harris at Drake University in Iowa. Excuse me, Jake Tapper. That would be. And she's talking about Medicare for all.
Correct me if I'm wrong. To reiterate, you support the Medicare for All bill, I think initially co-sponsored by Senator Bernie Sanders. You're also a co-sponsor on it. I believe it will totally eliminate private insurance. So for people out there who like their insurance, they don't get to keep it?
Well, listen, the idea is that everyone gets access to medical care. And you don't have to go through the process of going through an insurance company, having them give you approval, going through the paperwork, all of the delay that may require. Who of us has not had that situation where you got to wait for approval and the doctor says, well, I don't know if your insurance company is going to cover this? Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on.
All right, let's go to the
I think she meant let's move on, not to switch questions. Jake Tapper took it that way. But look, I mean, here's an example of the opposite of what we've been talking about, right? She doesn't address the words that Jake Tapper says in terms of like, that means that people can't keep their insurance, because she's smart. She doesn't want to say that because that ended up being a club that they clubbed Obamacare with and Obama with. But she went on to say why nobody's going to care about that. So here she is talking about the morality of billionaires. Got to be careful here, folks, because, you need money to run for office if you're not going to get all those $27 donations.
My question for you tonight is simple. In a society where nearly 1 in 5 children live in poverty, is the existence of multi-billionaires morally defensible?
Well, let's just say this. We have had policies in this country, at least in the last 2 decades, that have disproportionately benefited the top 1% to the exclusion of working families. We have a situation in our country right now where just recently this administration passed a tax bill that benefits big corporations in the top 1% to the exclusion of supporting working families. And that is unconscionable. And you are exactly right. We have babies in America today that are on the verge of starving. We have families that cannot pay their bills. In fact, one of my proposals is that we address this inequity around what has been termed what would be one of the most significant tax cuts for middle-class families in generations. And it is what I propose. I call it the LIFT Act. But what we would do is for families who are making less than $100,000 a year.
Pause it for a second before we hear what the plan is to not address that question. This is an insufficient answer from my perspective. And I'll tell you why. Because someone was talking about 2 decades. What is that? What are you talking about? 2 decades? It's been like 50 years that we have had this income inequality. Like, she's not steeped in this. And it's clear. And there is only one way to deal with wealth inequality in this country. Now, you could say, I have no problem with wealth inequality. Fine. But I think people who listen to this program know that we have a problem with it. But there's only one way to deal with it. And that is not by providing $6,000 extra for some segment of the population and that's not a bad idea. But that's not going to deal with wealth inequality. Wealth inequality can only be dealt with by limiting the income of people making billions or millions of dollars. Just income inequality, let's start with. Wealth inequality, obviously, you need to, in some ways, get more aggressive with taxing wealth. There's a lot of arguments that it's very difficult to do. People are going to hide it and this and that. That all that may be true. We do it in terms of we tax wealth in the context of property taxes right now. We could do it with other things. We could do it in terms of capital gains. We could do it in terms of a high top tax and a marginal tax rate. The ideas are out there. Every day for the past 2 weeks, we've been doing a video with AOC talking about it on national television, so it's not hard to find. But she doesn't want to go there. People can make their own assessments as to whether or not it's important that she goes there, but make no doubt about it, she's not going there. Good.
$100,000 a year, they would receive a $6,000 tax credit that they could receive $500 a month. Understanding that we have so many families in America right now that are a $500 emergency away from complete financial catastrophe. Let's also understand that we've got to have economic policy in this country that understands that right now it's not working for working people. Right now in America, in 99% of the counties in America, if you are a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. That is absolutely unconscionable. And so we've got to correct it. And part of it is that people at the top 1%, people who are making $10 million a year, who have $50 million a year, they need to pay more taxes.
And she gets there. She gets there.
And we've got to, and what we have to do is correct course. Because for too long, the rules have been working against working families and working for the benefit of the top 1%. We have to correct course.
Now she won't go as far as saying that billionaires are morally indefensible. She says you got to raise taxes on the wealthy, but this is not anything that's particularly new. Like, look, there are specific plans out there. It's just interesting to me that she'll cite the $10 million figure, right? Which is where AOC has put her 70% tax rate that she's, rhetorically. It's just interesting. I will make this prediction. She will be a lot more specific this time next year.
Well, she's going to have to be.
Exactly.
Because the beauty of candidates like Bernie and Warren is they make people say what they mean.
Exactly.
Like I heard someone say that Obama was the last horoscope candidate, or the last candidate who could be vague enough so what he's saying could mean, whatever you want it to mean. And that's just not going to be possible anymore.
That's exactly right.
Well, Trump was the last one, I think.
Well, I think you could get away with it on the right in a little bit different way than you could on the left, particularly in this day and age.
That ship has sailed on the right.
But that's exactly my point, is that, there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of, like, you ask me a question, are billionaires immoral? I'm going to tell you everything that you know already about a problem that exists. But I'm going to prove to you that I know that problem exists. And then I'm going to give you a vague answer as to how I'm going to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie got Hillary to run against single-payer health care the last time around. She was not expecting to have to do that.
It is going to be very different this time. It is. And the fact is that you set expectations during these campaigns. And it's a lot harder than it used to be to set these expectations and not meet these promises. I mean, promises usually get met. There's not a lot that Obama promised that he didn't deliver on. It's just that people didn't listen too carefully to the promises.
Yeah.
Entitlement reform was on the bill. And fortunately, that didn't happen because of the Freedom Caucus.
Did he promise card check?
Card check, I don't know if I think he said he would sign it. But the problem, I think, was more with the Senate in that instance.
But also, like what I was saying before about the powerful rightward forces that enact on you as soon as you get into office, if someone's being this vague at the outset, it doesn't bode well for the future.
Wait to see where she is in January of next year. I mean, it's understandable why on day one you're not going to have the same specifics, because frankly, that was also my point in terms of her brand. Elizabeth Warren, she's going to come out with proposals that are going to be surprising insofar as how they're executed. Same with Bernie. But there's not going to be any proposal that's going to come out of Bernie or Elizabeth Warren that we're going to be like, wow, I had no idea they wanted to do that. Right? I mean, that's just not going to happen because we know already what their agenda is. Calling from an 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. It's Brian from Chicago.
Hello, Brian from Chicago. What's on your mind?
Hey, first of all, thanks for taking my call. Just want to let you know, long-time listener, first-time caller. You guys do a great job. Love listening in. I don't know if anybody else was catching this, but I had a hard time. I couldn't hear the videos that you were playing on the phone line, at least. I missed all that clip. I heard your commentary, but yeah, I just wanted to let you know since you're doing some troubleshooting, it seemed. But anyway, I'll keep this short. Do you know if anybody's really spoken out about what they think about private prisons or anything, specifically Kamala Harris? Do you know if she's said anything about that?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that about private prisons. I don't know that she's addressed private prisons as of yet. On the federal level, I think the on the federal level, the Obama administration had basically said, we're going to get rid of private prisons, if I'm not mistaken. Now, that was reversed by Trump, but I have no reason to believe that she is going to be to the right of Obama on this. Like, prison reform is one of the few bipartisan areas where you have a certain amount of cover, regardless of where you are. However, we do have this clip of Kamala Harris from 2013 at the Chicago Ideas Week. And again, I say this with regret, don't think that Democrats largely are going to have as much of an issue with her stance on criminal justice reform that I have. But at the very least, it should be out there. Here she is at the Chicago Ideas thing, and we're going to make it so that you can hear this. You tell me how you would characterize her perspective on the idea of criminal justice reform 6 years ago.
I have friends like Eva Patterson. Okay, so I say with all love and warmth that part of the concern also for people who are progressive thinking and liberal-minded, or just progressive thinking in terms of just fix it, is that we all have these posters in our closet that is attached to a stick that we sometimes will card out when we're talking about criminal justice policy and those statistics that you first heard when we opened it up, incarceration. And we run around with these signs, build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails. And we walk around everywhere, build more schools, we protest, build more schools, less jails. Put money into education, not prisons. There's a fundamental problem with that approach, in my opinion. And it's this. I agree with that conceptually, but you have not addressed the reason I have 3 padlocks on my front door. So part of the discussion about reform of criminal justice policy has to be an acknowledgement that crime does occur, and especially when it is violent crime and serious crime, well, there should be a broad consensus that there should be serious and severe and swift consequence.
Okay, so, now this is a little bit hard to sort of grasp what she's saying here. She says that when you talk about putting more money into education versus prisons, you cannot ignore this fundamental the truth that why there are 3 padlocks on my front door. So it's unclear to me if she's saying there, you can't ignore the fact that people are afraid of crime, if that's just a political situation. And then she goes on to say, you got to acknowledge that crime exists. Now, I don't think that people who are saying put less funding for prisons, more funding for education, are saying that crime doesn't exist. I think what they're saying is, hey, we're putting a lot of people in prison for illegitimate reasons. Not we shouldn't, and I know there's some people who say abolish prisons. We've interviewed them on this show, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about sort of what is considered sort of mainstream normie politics at this point. I don't think that there's any major contingent in the Democratic Party that says we don't believe crime exists. But I think there is the mainstream of the Democratic Party in 2019 says there's a lot of people in prison who shouldn't be in prison. There's, in fact, there's an extraordinary number of people. And that's what I think the marijuana, decriminalization, legalization movement is largely about. That there's a whole like hundreds of thousands of people in our prisons for drug offenses and for small time offenses that perhaps not only should they not be in prison, but to the extent that anything that they did that we have a real problem with as a society could be fixed by more opportunities for people that come from some basic services, maybe not just education, maybe sort of anti-poverty things and a whole host of other initiatives. But to set up this dichotomy is highly problematic. To straw man and say, and maybe it was different in 2013, but that's not that long ago, to say that there's a vast majority of Democrats or people who are saying that we want more money for education. They're saying that there's no such thing as real crime, that we're not acknowledging that crime is real, that violent crime is real. That to me sounds like a very, very strange formulation that is problematic. Now, she hasn't had a chance to address this in 2019. She may come back and say, I've rethought my perspective on this stuff. And, she should obviously have that opportunity and people should be asking her that. But this is, right now, what I feel like the thing to do for people is a long list of questions for all the candidates, not just Kamala Harris, not just Bernie Sanders, but Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg and anybody else who's declared. It's time to start coming up with questions that people should be asked.
Yeah, she argued against releasing nonviolent offenders because they were a valuable source of labor in prison.
I want to see that.
Well, and also, and I don't know what that part was, Jamie. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but
the lawyers under her direction did when she was AG.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys have a clip of that. I'd love to hear it. But I think one of the main things that's kind of keeping the marijuana legalization held back so much is just the seizures that they get from it. Local police departments and everything, they can seize your car, your house, whatever is supposedly connected to that drug trafficking, in their opinion. And that's a big fund source for them. So I think that's one of the things. But,
that creates pressure, but that's going to go by the wayside. That. I mean, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but largely across the country, that's done. It is done. The fight about marijuana legalization is all but over. A dinosaur wags its tail 20 minutes after its head's been lopped off, or so I'm told. And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, the head has been more or less severed. The cat's out of the bag. It's just a matter of time now. But appreciate the call.
Oh, and 2013 was also the same year that Black Lives Matter became active. I'm pretty sure. So it just shows.
There's some questions.
It shows like two very different approaches to criminal justice in America, and it's a time when a whole lot of people, especially young Black people, were saying, this isn't working for us.